2017 might be viewed as the year of the resistance, with a Democratic-controlled state government in Sacramento resisting policies emanating from the Republican-controlled federal government in Washington. But it was also much more than that. Some issues specific to California were debated, such as the state's cap-and-trade program, lack of affordable housing, and deteriorating roads. What was done and what business was left unfinished? We'll ask Dan Walters with CalMatters and John Myers of the LA Times. California Politics in 2017, a look back.
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from The Wonderful Company, harvesting health and happiness around the world. Chevron's Coalinga oil field and Fresno County have been doing side by side for over 100 years. Learn more at doers.com. From the California Channel at the State Capitol and the Maddy Institute, it's the Maddy Report with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Welcome. The policies emanating out of Sacramento and Washington, D.C. couldn't be more different. And the politics of one-party rule in both capitals only added to the political polarization. We've got two guests to discuss all of this, John Myers with the LA Times and Dan Walters with CalMatters. Welcome.
Thank you.
So, immigration, a huge issue. I don't want to say huge in the way President Trump says it. A huge part of the Trump's message.
Huge.
Exactly. Better you than me. Anyway, but polling shows that message didn't really resonate with California voters. So Dan, you've got over 2 million undocumented residents in California, over 200,000 dreamers. How did the state respond on the immigration issue?
Well, that's why it didn't resonate in California. The 2 million people, or actually probably more than 2 million, actually maybe 3 million, are part of the California fabric. They're our neighbors, basically. They're in the schools, they're in the jobs place, and we have become accepting of that. And it's kind of odd because 2 decades ago, Californians were passing ballot measures to try to get rid of them, basically. So it has been a huge change in California over the last couple of decades, politically and socioeconomically. And part of that is that the undocumented immigrants have become part of California. And it's hard to find people really, even in the Republican Party these days in California, that don't say we need to have immigration reform.
We had a response, SB 54, sanctuary state.
Well, we had a couple of things there. First, I mean, to Dan's point, we've had a long conversation about illegal immigration and what to do and a pathway to citizenship, the phrase that you hear a lot, waiting on Washington to do something. In 2017,
which by the way is very popular, the pathway to legalization.
It is, depending on how you define it,
right,
and of course the details would matter. But in 2017, we've had a really intense, to your point, Mark, really intense discussion about the Trump administration's reaction to illegal immigration, specifically what happens to someone who's in the country illegally, who is picked up by law enforcement. Does law enforcement cooperate or not cooperate with federal immigration authorities? It's important to note here that we're talking about people who may be picked up and released and found that they did nothing wrong, and in some cases would they have that cooperation. And that was this push by the legislature, and the governor signed on to it, to say we're going to limit that relationship. It is different in every county. I think that some of my reporters have found, you go 58 counties, you find some who do not cooperate at all currently, to look at Fresno, where they've had very close cooperation in the valley. And so SB 54 is going to limit all of that. How it's going to really work in practice, we don't know. But it was a direct reaction to what Democrats in California felt was a threat about the issue of illegal immigration.
I think there's another point to be made about that, is that it was going to be a lot more confrontational with the federal government until Jerry Brown stepped in and said, no, let's cool this off, modified it. So the list of exceptions grew about 20-fold from this barrier to cooperation.
Like 800 exceptions or something. So, John, let me ask you this. Another big issue in the Trump campaign was this repeal and replace of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. In California, though, the ACA has resulted in a dramatic drop in the uninsured, cutting the rate basically in half. How did the state respond on that issue?
Well, there's nothing, you started off this conversation by talking about huge, as the president would say. There's nothing that's not huge about the Affordable Care Act in California. No state implemented it more aggressively. I mean, let's remember, the audience should remember that the Affordable Care Act is both the exchange program of people who are getting their own health insurance, and it's the expansion of Medi-Cal, the state's version of Medicaid, which is health care for the poor. California embraced both ends of this system As you said, the number of uninsured have dropped dramatically. It would be a huge budget hit, the Medicaid, Medi-Cal part, if the Affordable Care Act is wiped out.
Like $20 billion or something?
Potentially, and much more over that over the course of 6 years, 7 years. The state could not fill it in. You would have lots of people uninsured. And you've seen tremendous pushback from California leaders, congressional and Governor Brown, about doing that. And of course, as the year ends, we don't really know what the heck's going to happen.
What do you think about that issue of the Affordable Care Act in California?
Well, as John says, it has been huge, as we were using that word. Yeah, we're down to
use that word twice.
We're down to about 6% of Californians not having health coverage of some kind, and the majority of those are undocumented immigrants. And when all the discussion about having universal health care in California, or single payer, however you define that, really is about, because they are really the last group that's uninsured, it's really about whether California should cover the undocumented. Going back to the previous issue of immigration, should we take that next step to making undocumented immigrants legal in California by offering them health insurance?
Yeah, one part of the process. Well, up next, we're going to talk about if any progress was made on some of the big issues confronting the state. It kind of depends who you ask. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Hepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with Dan Walters of CALmatters and John Myers with the LA Times about the political year that was at the state capitol. So Dan, a big issue in the state capitol, and the governor and legislature probably say is a big win, was the renewal of cap and trade. Essentially put to rest the question of whether cap and trade was here to stay. Apparently it is. So what did they do? What does it mean for California?
It's probably not going to mean very much for California. You know, one of the mysteries about cap and trade that people on the inside know the solution to, but nobody outside, it doesn't really mean very much. It adds a little bit to the gas price, about a dime a gallon maybe, but it's not a big contributor to the reduction of greenhouse gases. It's a marginal producer. It's more symbolic than anything, and I think the most important thing, it generates money that politicians can spend, and that's why it got set to be a big deal.
Was it supposed to be a revenue generator? It was supposed to be all about...
Technically, not a revenue. They said that in court. Not a revenue generator, but in fact, it generates maybe as much as $300
and not to go down
million a year.
Not to go down memory lane, but when it was put in place in 2006, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Democratic legislature, it was a shall, not may, and it was market-based mechanisms. Right. Environmentalists, Democrats wanted a more stringent climate change control. That was the most that Schwarzenegger was willing to give them. So to Dan's point, right, it was never intended to be the thing.
And business would rather that than command and control. They want some flexibility, so business kind of came on board.
Carbon taxes, all other ideas out there.
Do you think the reason why that got renewed was maybe kind of a pushback to kind of Donald Trump and the Republicans, Republican Congress?
I don't think that had anything to do with it, to tell you the truth. I mean, the rhetoric, yes, but in reality, no. It was really about the money.
Yeah.
It's about the money. The fact is, it generates.
Isn't it always?
Maybe $2.5 or $3 billion a year that politicians can spend. And they love to spend money, and it's considered to be kind of free money.
And it generates a key portion of money that has kept the governor's high-speed rail project going because those bonds were not sold, and that money became a really big deal.
Yeah,
so the money,
25% of that money is going to high-speed rail. Let me ask you, John, another question that came up in the legislature this year, and that was transportation. There was a $52 billion transportation package to fix California's deteriorating roads. Significant accomplishment, I think the governor and the legislature would argue. Others would say maybe not so much because we're paying for it with a gas tax. What do you think? Did Californians going to like this?
I don't know. I mean, let's ask Californians at the end of 2018 what happened, because there have been these efforts to put it on the ballot in 2018 to try to repeal it. I mean, you know, at the end of the day, it's fascinating to me a couple of things out of the gas tax. The first one is that gas taxes used not to be as controversial as they are now, but all taxes are controversial, especially among Republicans. Californians know they're a problem with roads. There's nobody who gets out on a highway in a city in this state and doesn't feel the potholes or anything else. The thing that is really fascinating to me, Mark, is that, you know, people say we need this money. It's for fixes. It's not to help capacity. Right. There are clogged roads that won't get fixed as a result of the $52 billion over 10 years.
Smoother, slower drive.
Thank you, exactly. You'll go slow, but you'll be not as bumpy.
However, it should be noted that the people who are advocating this kind of implied it was going to do something about congestion. But we're stuck here, and this is the great dilemma, I think, about this issue. We are now paying the highest gas taxes in the country when you put it all together. But we have the second worst roads. So the question is, why? Why do we pay the highest taxes to have some of the worst roads?
Do you have an answer?
I don't have an answer. And I've sought that answer many times, and nobody can truly explain it or it's too complicated to try to figure out, have to do an autopsy on it or something. But the fact is that our gas prices in California are a lot higher than they are in the rest of the nation. I saw a little snippet of something on television that was live the other day out of South Carolina, and the gas price on the station was $1.90 a gallon.
I can't remember that. Let me ask you, Dan, about affordable housing. That was another big issue on the docket in 2017. More and more Californians are being kind of priced out of the housing market. The legislature and the governor would argue they've made a serious attempt to address that issue. True? False?
Well, they can make an argument they made a serious attempt, but look at the numbers. By their own numbers, this package of taxes, new taxes, and bonds will...
That will be on the ballot in November.
Be on the ballot in November. Will add 77,000 units over 5 years, but California is running about 80,000 units per year short of what it needs. So it's really kind of a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, 1.5 million, I think, units is what they need.
And look how hard it was to get it. I mean, going back to what Dan said, the one component of it, tax fee tax, we talk about these terms in Sacramento often, but it's this real estate transaction fee. That took easily, 2 legislative sessions to try to get a 2/3 vote on it. And it was a very minor part of this. The bond is borrowing. It's a minor part of this. I feel like, if anything, the question is, did it stir the appetite to do more? And even though these are really tough problems, and I would say they're really tough because it's the state-local government relationship over who gets to control this, maybe there's an appetite to do more.
Sequel reform?
I think the thing about both the transportation package and the housing package is they labored mightily. It took a lot of things to get it, but both of them are relatively minor in the face of the need for both transportation improvements and more housing. They're kind of half a loaf sorts of things, but the problem with that is, to the politicians, we've checked that off the list now. Maybe there's no appetite to do even more.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Well, 2017 wasn't without its scandals and controversies. That discussion in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking with John Myers of the LA Times and Dan Walters with CALmatters about the year that was. 2017 was not without its scandals and controversies. So, John, there's an ongoing sexual harassment scandal that's engulfed the state capitol. Numerous current and former legislative staffers, female legislative staffers and lobbyists have made some pretty serious charges. Who was implicated? What was done to correct the situation? What are the politics?
Well, the politics are fascinating to me, Mark, for one reason at the beginning of this, is because it cuts across a lot of the political camps that people normally separate themselves in. Race, gender, party, there are stories of a pervasive culture of it. And I think reporters who've covered the Capitol and covered politics, they've heard stories, they've heard that there were things, but no one ever felt the ability to come forward. And in the wake of the Harvey Weinstein scandal, everybody has come forward.
Seems like it really opened the floodgates.
Yeah, as 2017 comes to a close, we've had 3 lawmakers who have been accused of sexual misconduct directly, and 1 who has resigned, and others who have been under investigation. And a real debate about the nature of how to report these kinds of allegations, how they're investigated, how they're dealt with. I don't think it's going to be over anytime soon. I think there are going to be more names and more questions.
President Obama says we should elect more women as a result.
Yeah, well.
They don't seem to have the problem.
No, they don't seem to have
the male legislators.
I would never have thought I would see the word masturbate in a screamer headline on the front page of the Sacramento Bee, but I did as this thing was going on.
I hope no children are watching.
I hope children are watching. Yeah, it is, and I've been around here for over 4 decades, and I've heard all the stories, some worse than have been reported, like a sergeant of arms who got raped one night by an assemblyman in his office. So it's been around a long time. You had put it in a broader category. You might call it the objectification of women that has gone on in the Capitol a long time. The girlfriends, the people on the staff, all the stuff, all the little games that are played. But it's finally kind of coming out to a head, and it's going to have political ramifications. If the legislators who have been currently accused are all forced out of the legislature, for one thing, the Democrats will lose their supermajorities.
Well, they have 2/3 right now, so you figure they're going to be more adversely affected.
They're going to lose their supermajorities, which could alter the politics of 2018 until those seats are filled, because there are issues kicking around that would require supermajority votes. And so the Republicans who've had fond hopes of ruining the supermajority, may have it done by the Democrats themselves because of this.
I would just point out one thing that's interesting. I mean, we've done, the Times has done a number of reporting on some of these allegations. And the thing that you find often and often is that first of all, there's obviously a difference between philandering and misconduct and harassment and abuse and things that are serious. And the other one is that that the reason these stories never seem to go anywhere is that these women felt the power dynamic in politics did not allow them to come forward. Right. A lobbyist who couldn't talk about a lawmaker because they were worried about their bills, a staffer, a campaign consultant. The power dynamic is powerful in politics, and I think it has kept this low.
Yeah, but the legal standard is severe or pervasive. So it's not talking about saying, hello to someone. That's not sexual harassment. It's severe or pervasive.
Except that the legislature says it has a zero tolerance policy.
Then that's different.
Not quite defined yet, but stay tuned.
Yeah, but that's a higher
and
standard.
I think the legislative leadership, and particularly in the Senate, Kevin De Leon, the President Pro Tem of the Senate, has been a little bit behind the curve on this thing. The Assembly's kind of out in front of it. The Senate's been behind the curve, and it could hurt Kevin De Leon's chances of winning a U.S. Senate seat in 2018, particularly since he's taking on the state's most prominent woman politician, Dianne Feinstein.
Dan, let me ask you about this. The UC has had a bit of a scandal around it this last year. UC President Napolitano's top aides apparently intervened in the state auditor's investigation regarding $175 million that had been set aside in an undisclosed reserve. Is the UC going to suffer politically?
Oh, I think it's already suffered politically. There's already legislation to make interference with an auditor an infraction. But I think in a broader sense, they will suffer because UC comes to the Capitol all the time begging for money. And now we find out there's $175 million that was kind of squirreled away someplace. Although they
kind of hard to argue poverty when
yes, it kind of tarnishes this kind of exalted position that UC has in the political thing of we are independent, we're not under the arm of the legislature, we cannot be interfered with, and yet they've been tolerating this sort of thing. And in fact, President Napolitano only got a little kind of a scolding. Right. She did not lose her job or anything like that, which would have probably occurred.
The top aides took the hit for
that. Yeah, they walked the plank for her.
And one thought, Janet Napolitano, when she was hired, was the most political president of the University of California ever. Most political history. Governor of Arizona, Homeland Security Secretary. She's going to need every one of those political skills.
You think the antenna would be up given her political skills?
Maybe, but she's got to use them in 2018.
We've only got 30 seconds left in the segment, but I want to ask you, John, about the Oroville Dam spillway last year. That problem, has that been fixed? Are we going to be worrying about that in 2018?
They're working on it. I think there are a lot of questions about how we got there and how we move it forward. I think the bigger question, yes, to your question, they're working on it. The bigger question is what else in the infrastructure universe in California is at a crucial point that we've got to deal with, and where's the money and what are we going to do?
And that's just the one we know about, right? Okay, up next. What about the business that was left unfinished in 2017? Where's that going in 2018? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. I'm Mark Kepler with the Maddy Institute. We're talking about the year that was in California politics with Dan Walters of CALmatters and John Myers of the LA Times. So let's talk about some unfinished business, John. One issue that was raised early in the year was bail reform. Where does that issue currently stand?
It stands at, I'd almost call it like the halfway mark. I mean, it's a 2-year legislative session. There were a couple of proposals. One of them is still alive. Everybody has committed to work on it. What we're talking about, of course, is the notion of how you deal with the fact that people who don't have the means to pay bail are often left in jail even when they don't have a crime that would have merited it. Someone who has the means can get out even if maybe the crime they're accused of would not merit it. And it really cuts into class and race issues, I think, in California, a way that is a larger story about the state.
Something like the average bail is $50,000. You've got to put 10% down, which is $5,000, and poor people can't afford that, so they end up staying in jail, and the richer people get to post bail.
Yeah, I think they're going. I think you're going to hear a lot about it in 2018, I should say, but they didn't get there in 2017.
You know, Dan, sadly, 2017 was another year of a series of mass shootings around the country. Usually, those kinds of things end up in state laws in California to combat gun violence. But in 2016, you had the passage of Prop 63. You had other gun control laws that were passed. Was there a similar political response in 2017?
No, and I think it's mostly because that so much had been done the year before. They'd had a big fight between the lieutenant governor and the president pro tem of the Senate over who was going to get political credit. One had a ballot measure, the other had a bill. And I think there was just no appetite to have another gun control battle in California. And I think there's also a sense that with the makeup of the Supreme Court, that if you pile on more controls in California, you're just inviting the Supreme Court to knock them out, because this is a pretty conservative Supreme Court, and a lot of these gun control, the stuff that they had passed before is making its way through the courts right now. and that, for example, the ban on high-capacity magazines was set aside by a federal judge pending further action. So that's so much as unsettled and everything. I just think there was no appetite.
There have
for
been
it
a
last
lot
year.
of gun control laws. There were something like 11 passed in 2013, 6 in 2016, so quite a few. John, let me ask you about wildfires in California. It seemed to be a pretty bad year this year for wildfires. What was state action to address that issue?
I mean, the state of really a lot of it, I think, Mark, comes down to money. First of all, in fighting the fires and in in creating the climate that you're able to roll back the fuel, the ability. I mean, this goes into the governor's larger conversation about climate and how the state has to resolve it. But I'm fascinated by this, as in so many other ones, about the local-state relationship, because some of this goes into development, where homes are built, how they're built. Local governments that think they know best, but then the state comes and has to pay for the firefighting costs. I think we're going to see a lot of this, because I think the climate science is pretty convincing that this is going to be an increasingly, pun intended, I apologize, folks, hot topic in California as the years move on.
There's millions of dead trees in the forest. They're just matchticks waiting to go up.
And underlying what John says is that on both the issues of housing shortage and the wildfire issue is an increasing conflict between state and local governments over the issue of land use.
Right.
Land use has always been a local government purview, but slowly but steadily, the state is taking a bigger and bigger role in land use, and that's one of the points of friction between the
He
state
who has the
and
goal
local
makes rules.
governments.
It's kind of like education, right? It's the state has a big say in that. Dan, I know you've written a lot about these two big infrastructure projects the governor's been pushing, the $17 billion Twin Tunnels project that the governor is promoting, and also the $68 billion high-speed rail project. What's their status at the end of 2017?
The train to nowhere and the tunnels to nowhere, you mean? I would say that the chances of both of those being completed ever are pretty small. Certainly not during Jerry Brown's governorship. At the moment, however, the tunnels look like they're in greater jeopardy because the Westlands Water District has pulled out of support. The support from other districts has been somewhat tepid. Basically, the only major support left is the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, and even its support is a little tenuous because its own agencies are balking somewhat. It's all money. I mean, the water districts have to put up the money. It's not just a question of supporting it. They have to put up the money, and so far it looks like they're not putting it up as much as it's needed. The tunnels are also a money issue. The state does not have the money to build what it wants to build. They're desperately searching for other sources of money, maybe a foreign government like China.
The train.
Yeah, the train.
The train, yes, excuse me, the train. And so it also suffers from a lack of money. So they both have the same problem, basically.
So what are your thoughts on those two major projects?
I don't want to go against Dan. I'm going to let his predictions stand out there. But think about, to Dan's point, if he says that the tunnels is the one that's in most jeopardy, that's not exactly a ringing endorsement of high-speed rail for all of those financial problems. Right. I think the other challenge for the governor, too, is that he's had a lot on his plate in the years that he's come back in this final tour in Sacramento. You haven't heard him make a big PR push on either of these projects. They have lingered for his governorship the last few years. And I think without a big PR push, you've got to make people figure out whether or not they really want them and why they would want them.
And I think the next governor, who, regardless of who he is, or she, I guess, could be she, probably not going to be as enthusiastic as Jerry Brown has been about him. And the public is not that enthusiastic about either one of them.
I guess we'll see as we move into 2018. I want to thank our guests, John Myers with the LA Times and Dan Walters with the CalMatters. If you want to stay up with state and local politics, you can follow the Maddy Institute on Twitter or Facebook, or log on to our website at maddyinstitute.org. This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the California Channel or the Maddy Institute. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions expressed on the Maddy Report, visit our website at maddyinstitute.org.